Well, hello, that's me again. It's September 14, it's Wednesday, and let's get to our goats, so to speak. And I will start with the issue which is being propagated as we speak, and there is such organization as Jamestown. It's a basically neocon think tank, and I liked how Mr. Medvedev, former president of Russia, and now this deputy secretary of the Russia Security Council, described American think tanks as dumb, which they are, most of them are, including on the very top, and they are basically stuffed top bottom with all kinds of the unprofessional people. Basically, it's mostly political scientists and some former military. But look at this. Going back to the events in Kharkiv area, we already have this Jamestown Foundation. It's one of those dumbest tanks out there, but we'll talk about this later. But look at this. Immediately, yesterday, they published the absolutely triumphalist and incredibly, basically delirious report, so to speak, by some Mykola Bieleskov. The guy, I have no idea who he is, and he is some kind of the operative in some kind of the organization in Ukraine. But look what he writes. He writes about how, offensive, sequence of events, mechanics and consequences, which is really funny. I cannot write about this anything because I don't have data on that, which is sufficient to really make any kind of the conclusions. But then again, it's media mostly. And look what he claims. He claims now that in approximately 1 week, Ukraine liberated, more than 6,000 square kilometers of its sovereign territory in Kharkiv. The question which immediately appears here is the fact that, first, it's at best, to put it mildly, very dubious statement, because you can go to RT and you also can read this. And here it is. Yesterday, Mr. Kirby, the guy who loves to cry about the atrocities committed by Russians, obviously he doesn't care about Russian children, women, and others, and Russians do not commit atrocities, really. But look at what he says suddenly. White House warns of Putin's military potential. And that's what yesterday Mr. Kirby, evidently kind of diverging from this whatever Mykola name in Jamestown Foundation, he says, they clearly still have a military capable of inflicting great damage and casualties, Kirby told reporters at a briefing on Tuesday afternoon. For all the problems the Russians may have faced in Ukraine, their military is still very large and very powerful, and Russian President Vladimir Putin still has an awful lot of military capability left at his disposal, not just to be used in Ukraine, but potentially elsewhere. Well, we'll discuss this issue, but look what Mr. Zelensky himself stated a couple of days ago. He claimed that they liberated 2,000 square kilometers. Well, unless, of course, Mr. Zelensky is somehow misinformed, which I totally admit that could happen, but the issue, of course, is that 6,000 kilometers was the number pulled out of the ass of CNN. CNN doesn't have reporters, it has the ideologues and propagandists, and so now suddenly, from 2,000, it, multiplied by 3, it's 6. Next week it's going to be probably 25,000 kilometers, and probably in about 3 to 4 weeks they will liberate all of Russia, which is going to be, European part. We're looking at like 3.5–4 million square kilometers. But hey, it's American and Ukrainian propaganda machine which works over time. And going back to this Mykola whatever from Jamestown Foundation, look what he writes. It's really fascinating, actually. He writes that Ukrainian forces proved to be masters of maneuverable warfare and operational art despite such objective constraints as lack of artillery, armor, and piloted aviation. Most of all, the Balakleya-Kupiansk offensive was a major strategic coup for Kiev, as successful action on the ground debunked the consensus that Ukrainian-Russian war will be a protracted stalemate in which neither side is able to attain key political objectives by major offensive operations. Well, let's start with the funniest part. Basically, when he says about something about maneuverable warfare, let me explain what maneuverable warfare is, especially as he says, lacking of the armor and aviation. As I already stated, and especially pointed your attention in my last video about this whole situation, is the fact that the whole maneuverable warfare of the Ukraine, or armed forces of Ukraine, is about moving bunch of its forces along the line of the contact, and they moved it in Kherson. Everybody already forgot what Kherson was. At Kherson, they lost more than 10,000 people. So they lost a division there. Then they tried Kharkiv. Kharkiv, yeah, let's not, it's not over yet, but we're looking at probably about the same slaughterhouse which happened in Kherson. Now they're concentrating forces in Zaporozhye. So that's going to be probably another, wowzer in terms of the human losses. But again, as I already stated, both, and as this report from Jamestown Foundation testifies, most of it is for the optics. And that's where we have to go back to what Mr. Kirby stated. And what Mr. Kirby stated basically obviously was a spoil and a little bit of a downer on VSU propaganda and even on the American propaganda. The question which I constantly repeat, and again, I'm talking to people whose attention span is slightly larger or longer than that of the guppy fish or any aquarium fish for that matter, and I'm talking about this time span of about what? 2 weeks? 3 weeks? Remember the news. Russians knew about concentration of the forces in Kharkiv, and they allowed to retreat. You may say, what about those 6,000 kilometers? Let me show you, go back again with the updated area of their operations, which was happening there, which is essentially tactical level. Look at this. Of course, it's a very, very inaccurate, very, very approximate basically a representation of the area where the, not really battles, movement of the troops of armed forces of Ukraine happened, including the number of the units which comprised completely of from the Western mercenaries. And as you can see yourself, it is indeed roughly 2,000 square kilometers with the perimeter of about, perimeter mind you, it's not the side, it's all sides combined, about 189, 190 kilometers. This is what we have today, you know. And for people who ask this question, and obviously a question induced by Western and Ukrainian propaganda about Russians abandoning those people in Balakleya and, for example, in Izium. I will repeat again the first point, which I will explain. Everybody now, which is obviously the issue of the IPSO and all those PSYOPs, is the fact that everybody tries to recall and use the statement by first deputy of the chairman of the Federation Council, which is the upper chamber of the Russian Duma, State Duma, Andrei Turchak, about the fact that Russians are there, you know, forever. First, let me explain. People who say that Russia promised nothing. And what is known today, actually, majority of population there, in those abandoned cities, they are not really cities, they're towns. Actually, they're townships. Some of them, like the largest, they have like population of 27,000, which was prior to special military operation. Those people are not friends of Russia, you have to understand. And when Turchak was saying this, he was expressing his personal opinion. And that's what I'm trying to say. Russia promised nothing of like to people there, most of whom, majority, we know this now for a fact, are people who are very pro-Ukrainian and they do not like Russians. And the issue here is that only Kremlin, only executive branch of Russian political power, so to speak, Russian political system, can issue any kind of the policy statements and forecasts regarding the larger national aims or objectives. That means Kremlin means articulating through his press secretary, Mr. Peskov, and of course you can always go to the Kremlin.ru, which publishes official Kremlin documents, which later, as they are basically trickling down to the other government, executive branch, organization and departments, will be implemented by means of, for example, general doctrines and special laws for example, Russia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Russia's Defense Ministry, Russia's intelligence community, all those people who have very little to do with the legislature, let alone personal opinions of the guy from legislature. Lindsey Graham, being influential asshole, in the Congress, especially in the Senate, he can say anything he wants. But if Joe Biden, whatever you can say about Joe Biden, writes something in terms of the executive order, you know what? They have to follow it. And that's how simple as that. But many people don't understand. And of course, as being the part of the psychological operations, informational operations, and brainwashing people, and especially brainwashing people in Ukraine and in the West, you have the result that people say that Russia promised something. No, Russia didn't promise anything. Mr. Turchak, Andrei Turchak, as a person, he promised, he expressed his personal opinion. Now, when we go back to this situation with the issue of the population, it is not loyal to Russia. It is known fact. And for people who continue to press this issue that, oh my God, Russia sustained some kind of the defeat in Kharkiv area, no, Russians simply withdrew. And those people who say now that, oh, they were also persecuting some teachers or Russian, loyal population, no. If you look at the news, which have been reported steadily since the end of August, Russia already was evacuating population, which was loyal population, let alone teachers, and teachers who wanted to be evacuated, they have been evacuated. So primarily what we're dealing here with yet again wave of the fake news and some triumph, which is not really a triumph, because when one considers, and we're looking at probably more than 10,000 casualties right now on the Ukrainian side, we're looking at, again, at pretty much operational disaster. And if people think that, for example, very small Russian garrisons, which were stationed, for example, in Balakleia or in Izum, we're looking at what? Couple companies of Sobor, which is actually the basically the police or special forces of the police who've been staying there and who were still able to hold them back for 6 days. So you have to really think attentively what is going on here and what we do not know. And I will tell you, we don't know most of it. We can only surmise or we can only speculate. Or in my case, because I pretend to be an analyst, I can forward some kind of the hypothesis, But reality is, even in Kupiansk, armed forces of Ukraine are present only in the western part of the city. The eastern part of the city is still controlled by Russian armed forces. And there are, again, as I stated, along the line of the shores of the Oskol River, there now the fortifications being erected, and I don't think so they have the basically resources or let alone desire, armed forces of Ukraine, to get over the river. And another important thing, you can look it up yourself, compare photos of, let's say, people who fight in Russian armed forces and compare number of the POWs, which is actually quite significant, again, both in Kherson and again around Kharkiv. And when you see at the state of the Ukrainian armed forces and their POWs, it's really, really pathetic. Some of them look completely emaciated, others probably suffering from the drugs and withdrawal. There's a lot of things which anybody who has any kind of the military professional background will see immediately. And that explains this a little bit of downer from Mr. Kirby, you know. So, and that explains also why the CNN is pulling out of its ass and is repeated by all those amateurs from Jamestown Foundation, about 6,000 square kilometers. If people don't have any care about their reputation, I can tell you immediately, again, we already saw there basically how American top brass, military top brass, discredited itself completely being amateurs. And I'm talking about from those people like, you already know, Generals Keane, Generals Petraeus, all kinds of people of this nature. But this is not all of it. And that allows me to go back and remind you something which I spoke about before. But before I will remind you about it, I have to stress again, knowledge is not enough. Even understanding is not enough. That's what many people do not understand. I can know many things. I can even understand some things. But unless they are internalized, and that means they become your guidance, they become those factors which you act upon, it means absolutely nothing. Being informed is not being knowledgeable. Being knowledgeable is not being a professional unless it is internalized and applied constantly. And here is what I wanted to get to you, and that's why I made this kind of preamble and spoke about it. Let's remember, a few months ago I started some lectures on the warfare and how operations work and what actually war is. Here's your PhD and excellent military historian and military thinker, Mr. Milan Vega. Remember this slide? Read attentively again. What is in it? Wars will be won or lost at the operational and strategic level. Hence, the critical importance of operational art will not be reduced. And then, of course, you can read the rest of it and about technological issues. And that's what many people do not understand when I am trying to tell them about white noise and what is called tactical minutia. They think that looking at those photos or videos of some shit being blown up or some things, happening on the battlefield means nothing. It absolutely means nothing unless, of course, you are operational level officer, you're operator, and you have all data, all those huge arrays of data and war correlates, which you can analyze and say, because and you can say your forecast, which will be applied on the operational level, while obviously tactics, operations, and strategy work simultaneously. Vertically, it is indeed operational and strategic level which defines the outcome of the war. And if people are still embroiled into this tactical minutiae about taking Balakleya and Izium, I'll give you the news today. Russians already took another two villages, not villages, some townships in Donbas itself. So, I mean, they don't scream about it. It just, matter-of-factly fight, especially when you understand that Russians are outnumbered together with their LDNR militias, and they achieve this, being outnumbered. So, but people get involved into this white noise of tactical minutia, pictures, and all those movements of basically platoons and company, which are tactical units, and they think they don't understand what is war and how it being executed and what it is on the operational and tactical, strategic level. Here, where I want to bring you back a little bit to my lecture yesterday about how many American military people think. And of course, I wrote so much about it. But I spoke last video about the Wehrmacht and German basically military views and approach to tactics and operational art, which have been almost transplanted, not completely, but transplanted to the American military school of thought. And let me show you something. Obviously, for many people who do not know real military history, Mr. Patton, General Patton, is the hero, especially primarily because of the outstanding movie Patton, and of course the acting by George C. Scott, which is one of my favorite actually actors in Hollywood. Great one. But look what I want to remind you about. Here's the Hoover Institution view, so you will not accuse me of being a little bit of the, how to say it, not just towards Mr. Patton. Look at this. Of the Allied World War II generals, George Patton may be considered the most German. He had carefully studied the early Blitzkrieg campaigns against Poland and France and shared the conviction of the Wehrmacht commanders that a war of movement, short, sharp and furious, was the way to avoid a repetition of the endless slaughter of World War I. Always take the offensive, never dig in was Patton's motto. Well, his motto was precisely because he didn't understand actually what real war of scale is. But then the people who write a review of the book on yet another one on Patton is that this. Like Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, Germany's most skillful World War II commander, Patton would also carefully monitor performance. This he did by sending out his staff officers to the front lines. Duh, no shit. I thought actually everybody were doing this. So as you can see yourself, we already have this absolute delirium which they basically print here. But hey, to Patton, war meant destroying the enemy main force, not clinging to the territory. Some interesting thing, which of course, again, it wasn't to Patton. Patton was basically nothing more than an army commander. His favorite approach was the oblique one, hold them by the nose and kick them in the rear, which in more polite textbook terms translates into pinning the enemy while the tanks attack his flanks. So there is a lot to be said about this whole thing, and by the way, to the basically credit of the Hoover Institution, they also give their opinion of German officers who actually, most of them, they never knew who Patton was to start with. But they also show that the guy was not really up to his task. You can read that thing there on Hoover Institute. And but let me explain all the idiocy of this whole quote, so to speak, from Hoover Institute in terms comparing Manstein and Patton. They do not understand that Erich von Manstein was one of the greatest generals, not only in Wehrmacht, he was one of the greatest generals in the history of the warfare, together with Zhukov, together with Rokossovsky, together with people of this scale. Patton is not even in the same league, and Manstein was also a strategist of the first order. And so when they print those, so to speak, revelations, which I don't know, it's really hilarious that Patton was sending his, basically subordinates to the front to have an idea about what is going on. No shit. He obviously read, I don't think so he read, he hated Russians, he was racist, he considered Russians Untermensch, and he was actually known for defending Germans and and Wehrmacht and Nazis. But point is, well, if you read even War and Peace, remember who Prince Andrew was in 1812 during Napoleon invasion of Russia. Yeah, he was actually subordinate and basically messenger and the person who was to report back to the higher-ups and staff from the front lines. So it's like they present some kind of thing which have been around for centuries and now presented as some Patton's ideas, which is preposterous. I mean, he's a pipsqueak compared to people of the scale of obviously Manstein model or Rokossovsky, Zhukov, and Tolbuchin. But hey, there you go. But at least even they say that, yeah, ouch, read the whole thing there. It's funny. But he got this idea correctly, Patton. But and again, it wasn't his idea for Patton. It was developed by the strategists of much greater level than he ever was. And apart from him suffering from the dyslexia, so the guy had issues, okay? And he was the oldest general in the Allied force, and that is why he was having this huge complex of inferiority because of that. But the point is, yes, war is about annihilation your enemy, physical destruction of his forces, and just how you go about it. And now this whole situation is being presented as some kind of revelation, while in reality, if you look what, for example, Russians do in Donbas and in Ukraine, you will see it perfectly. It is the physical annihilation of the equipment and personnel. And many people still try to present some kind of several dozen of kilometers advances, or rather maneuvering by Ukrainian force, which still is being decimated, as some kind of operational art. You know what? Evidently we have issues with people who really have real military background and proper military education or experience to even give the proper assessment. And I'm on record on that. So very few of those people really give the proper assessment. But the Patton bit is very relevant here, and the same as relevant in terms of Milan Viga, when he explains, and I will repeat again, wars are won on operational and strategic level. You may lose tactical engagement, for example, and you're still going to win the war. But again, it's difficult to explain to people who have the attention span of the guppy fish and who are constantly embroiled in the white noise of and visuals of the tactical minutiae in all those maps and everything, and they do not even understand how this whole thing works. My task is to help you to understand, and that's what I'm trying to do. Now, and that's the whole thing. If we're talking about operation and strategic level, well, what is strategic level? Well, strategic level is about what? Achieving political objectives of the war. And I can give you some, let's say, headlines from yesterday, and to understand how bipolar, and you can obviously look up the psychiatric definition of the bipolar disease, which is, of course, the swinging moods from complete euphoria to complete depression. And it happens very fast for many people. It's horrendous illness. I know a couple of people who suffer from this. It's horrendous. Unless they are on heavy antidepressants, they still, oh my gosh, it's horrible. So let me show you something. And as you know, and you can go to Jamestown Foundation, which published this crap from this Ukrainian dude, and read the delirium about Russia, about disintegrating in like 4 years or 3 years, or how Russians are suffering continuously with the, economic disaster which is in there. And yeah, we've been through that before. But look at this. If you look at the headlines yesterday, and you can see yourself, I do not follow the Dow Jones. Make no mistake, I just show yesterday. Dow Jones drops drastically, and look at this. Read this. Wall Street reacts to August shock inflation data. And immediately Dow Jones sinks, which really means absolutely nothing. We know that the situation is really bad, but the question is, they are shocked by inflation data. Under what stone have they spent their last 10 years not to understand that actually inflation risk and inflation in the United States has been already on the tremendous rise in the last already couple of years, at least. And they are shocked by this, and then suddenly, when they're shocked about this, they still begin to write about the bullish market and how to make money on the stock market. Again, stock market relates to the real economy of the United States or the world as much as I relate to my Chinese relatives, and believe me, I don't have any. And the question here is not only that. Basically, you can observe now bipolar basically patterns and idiosyncrasies in the American media and American governors constantly, all the time. They go from the immediate heights, like to lows. And one of them, for example, is this. Russia supposedly is, just done, right? Then suddenly we have Gazprom doubles export revenue despite delivering 43% less gas to Europe. And people should understand, this is basic arithmetics, people. This is basic math, really, that, yeah, you don't have to supply anybody anything when your prices go up 3 times or 4 times. I mean, you can sell less and still make a killing. And that's what many people don't understand, that Russia is making a killing and is washing cash. And when you look at the reactions of the for example, Europeans, especially after Russia demonstrated that she can turn off lights in Ukraine within 48 hours, you have immediately Mr. Macron and Mr. Scholz calling Putin. And you understand, it's all about Ukraine operations, but you know what? Putin explained to them, it continues, and it will continue until they, well, let's basically assume until the Ukrainian statehood as we know it today is completely demolished. So simple as that. And that is the real war. This is the war which is happening right now, and everything else is subordinated to it from the get-go. And this was subordinated to it from the 2013, when the United States actually unleashed Maidan, or basically coup d'etat, in Kiev. And now everybody gets hysterical after this very emotional high, from this tactical success, if you wish. Russians simply withdrew. And now they suddenly are downers. Oh, Russia still makes shitload of money. Russians still basically strangle Europe. Yeah, that's what it's all about. It's not about just deleting the Ukraine. There are so many things happening right now. Tomorrow, Putin and Comrade Z meet at Samarkand meeting, and there will be interesting, I'm pretty sure, statements and news pouring from there. It is much more than just about Ukraine, or Syria, or now Tajikistan, or Caucasus, or Far East. It's all huge front of the massive geopolitical struggle, in which basically everybody knows those who loses ceases to exist. Not necessarily in full physical sense, but in physical sense too. The United States cannot lose this, although it's already losing it massively. And that means the end of American hegemony, granted, grossly overstated to start with. It took Russia to show the world the way, and that, you know what, you can talk to United States and NATO, not just like equals. You just basically can defeat them. And that's the most important issue here, and that's what we need to talk about constantly and keep the larger picture in our minds. That's the only thing which really matters. And that's what I wanted to talk to you about today, and I'll continue to talk to you about it. And again, I want to thank profoundly my wonderful patrons who support me. And please, guys, those who can afford, of course, support me, please. And those who also like what I do, subscribe to my channel. And I will be talking to you later, guys, and have a nice rest of your week. Bye-bye.